Hey everyone, welcome back to Ornn's Kitchen. I'm Crazy Porcupine, and we've got some fun stuff to talk about this week, alongside some spicy decks to discuss. So let's get right into it. First up, we've got some fantastic news. All 10 cards for the next Variety Patch have been revealed courtesy of the attendees of the LOR Invitational event. So we're going to go over each card, brew up a spicy deck to use the card in, and discuss how good the deck will be. Our first card is Kashuri Swipe. This Noxus region card kills a damaged unit or deals 2 damage to it for 3 mana slow speed. While this card will automatically slot into existing Nora Noxus control decks, as well as any anti-Jin decks, we'll be looking at making a new deck here. We're going to build a Volibear Swain deck that's built around being able to deal mass damage across the board to easily level up Swain and Volibear. Kashuri Swipe will go excellent in this deck as it will be able to finish off any tougher deck or unit that would survive the mass damage effects like Avalanche. This will all of the mass damage across the board will be able to easily level up Swain and Volibear. This deck will include all the typical board control effects like Avalanche, and will also include the Avalanche Bird, and all of the other typical burn aggro cards from Noxus. This should ensure we hit the 15 damage to level up Swain by the time we play him on turn 5, and by turn 9 we should have either 1 or dealt enough damage for Volibear to come down and level up before swinging for lethal. Our second card is Talent Strike. This Demacia region card is a 5 mana slow speed that gives allied birds everywhere +1/+1, and then an allied bird strikes an enemy. While the immediate response is to put this into Nico with just birds, I think a better home is actually Quinn Freljord. While Ionia would be the response that most people have due to the bird lord there, that's the only bird in Ionia. And Freljord actually has a surprising number of birds that are worth playing. This means we can create a really strong mid-range deck that can easily close out games by attacking multiple times by using Quinn's Scout and the free attack effects from Demacia. You could replace a few cards for a second champion in the deck, and I'd recommend either Vayne or Udyr. But this deck wants to have as many birds as possible to maximize the value of Talent Strike. The third card is Chained Caster. This is our first new zero-cost unit since rotation. This Targon unit is a 3/2 with play, Curse Me with Chains. This is overall a really strong unit for enabling Nightfall, but also just really strong with sacrifice effects and Shadow Isles. This unit does a lot of work in Diana Nocturne by being a strong unit to enable Shadow Isles removal at no unit mana, while also easily helping trigger Nightfall for the deck. By enabling the sacrifice of Chained Caster, you also remove the chains from your hand, meaning that it's never really an issue. Considering Diana Nocturne isn't really a meta deck by any means, we won't brew up a brand new deck, we'll just slot in Chained Caster into the deck. And then, of course, just include all the best possible cards for Diana Nocturne by default. Our fourth card is Prancing Sea Spirits. This Ionia unit is a 2-mana elusive unit with the text, Play, summon an exact ephemeral copy of me. It's a base 1/1, but because it creates an exact ephemeral copy, any sort of hand buff makes this card much, much stronger. Most reports of the card were as an automatic inclusion in the Gwen Zed ephemeral aggro decks. Since this makes copies that carry over the stats of the original, we're actually going to build Kennen Bard. This is an Ionia Bard deck that utilizes a cheeky black flame, as well as the good elusive carriers of chimes to enable a really solid aggressive curve. Feel free to customize the deck freely, but 3 copies of Prancing Sea Spirits and 3 copies of Vestian Disciple helps ensure that you'll always put at least 5 copies of a single unit to help level up Kennen. Our fifth card is Bladebound Berserker. This Freljord unit is a 4-mana 3/4 that copies any slow speed spell that is played on another ally. The immediate home for this is, of course, Udyr decks. Any stance you play on an ally immediately goes on to BB. While Udyr's stances are a fantastic option, there aren't a lot of slow speed spells that target allies. This means that BB just really isn't a good card. However, I do think that Udyr Pantheon would work really well, or Udyr Morgana, since both Targon and Demacia have good slow speed single target spells that buff allies to help trigger BB. The copies on BB also help level up Morgana by adding an additional stack. While constantly targeting your units each round is something that Pantheon really likes. Overall, BB is a great way to help boost Udyr decks, but overall isn't a very versatile unit right now, and so we probably won't see BB make that much of an impact. The sixth card is Sneaky Swap. This Bandle City spell is basically a reskinned version of Shadow Shift. While Shadow Shift swaps out for a living shadow and is 2 mana, Sneaky Swap is 3 mana and replaces the unit with a Hungry Owlcat. This results in some interesting differences. While both cards can protect a unit by replacing it with a different disposable unit, the swap to a Hungry Owlcat has a few key differences. Hungry Owlcat has Spell Shield. This means that it can survive, eat a piece of removal and still stick around as a unit afterwards. Hungry Owlcat also doesn't have Ephemeral, which means swapping out simply to replay the unit recalled to trigger their play or summon effects is actually not a loss of tempo compared to Shadow Shift. Overall, this card may not be immediately main deckable, but if I were to build a deck around this card, it would probably be a Ken and Yumi Fey deck, taking advantage of the various effects that could boost up Fey units, because being able to readily protect all of your various Lord effects to keep your Hungry Owlcats boosted up is really strong. Our 7th card is Horned Swarmcaller. This is a Shuriman dragon that costs 6 mana. As Fury, play, give up to 2 enemies -1/-0 and disable their positive keywords, and this is a 6/6. This honestly just goes into any deck that runs Shurima as a region. One other notable part about this is that it is a dragon, and it does fit into Elder Dragon's region. This means that it should be considered as an auto-include in any Elder Dragon deck that has at least a 1-of to help disable any sort of pesky positive keywords that you may want to shut down. As for what deck to brew with this, Akshan Elder Dragon is a meme-level deck that had already had some basis because of how Elder Dragon boons help reduce the cost of Akshan's landmarks, and having an additional way to remove troublesome keywords from opponents' units can help ensure you stay alive to close out the game. Combine this with the amount of solid strike effects and other debuffs that Shurima has, ensures that you can close out games without issue. Now, our next up for our 8th card is Chakram Dancer. This Bilgewater unit is a 5-mana 3/4 that has Play, which is a skill, deal 1 damage to anything, and your skills drain. This is an interesting card, because at first glance, this just goes right into any Jhin decks, but those are aggro decks, not mid-range decks that would want the healing. The next thought would be Anti-Misfortune decks, but again, those tend to be aggro decks. There used to be an Anti-Gwen deck that utilized Ravenborn Tome to double up all the various skills in the region. That deck doesn't run Bilgewater, so it can't run Chakram Dancer. There are 2 possible decks I'm thinking of, though. The first is a Bilgewater Freljord deck that's Misfortune Volibear that utilizes Chakram Dancer to stay in long enough to help ramp out to Volibear, and then heal for anywhere from 6 to 12 damage off of Volley's skill that deals 4 damage to a unit, or 2 damage to the Nexus if the unit is missing. The next option is Misfortune Gwen. This one I would need to test, because even though Gwen's text doesn't show her attack as being a skill, it does interact as a skill for almost all other areas that affect the damage of skills, or just interact with skills in general. So Chakram Dancer should allow Gwen's attacks to effectively heal for double the damage they deal, making it nearly impossible to actually kill Gwen decks as long as they would survive an attack with at least 1 Nexus health remaining. Overall, Courtney has a lot of potential that would encourage a lot of interesting decks to take advantage of the various amounts of healing that going into Bilgewater can do for you if you build around Courtney for just a little bit. Our 9th card is Erastin the Disgraced. This Shadow Isles dragon is an 8-mana 8/4 fearsome. When I'm summoned, grant me Deathless, and attack, give enemies -1/-0 this round. This card text results in some very scary implications. Because of how the Deathless is granted on summon, not an innate keyword, Erastin will always have Deathless. This means the only way to get rid of him for good is to obliterate him, or kill him after removing his positive keywords. It's also important to note that he's also a Titanic unit, and hitting him off of Clash of the Titans is one of the biggest high rolls you can possibly get. As for what deck you can go in, Lyssandra's Shadow Isles Control is a mind-bogglingly strong option. Some individuals have pointed out in the comments of some of Snooey's videos, you can go into turn 8 with 3 small mana banked, play Erastin, immediately leave him, get 3 8-mana units summoned at that point, which levels up Lysandra if she's not already leveled, and then at turn end, the ephemeral versions will die, reviving from Deathless, resulting in 5 8-mana units summoned, which would then allow for you to play the Watcher to be for free. This is a nearly game-winning combo, and if you build around the fact that Erastin is a Titanic unit and can have his cost reduced by sigils, you could potentially pull this combo off a few turns earlier, possibly by turn 6 or 7, depending on how well you ramp. This could be a very strong deck option after the variety patch, especially since the Temple to True Ice making Rustin always end up as an 8-8 instead of an 8-1. This is definitely going to be a deck I build when the variety patch drops on the 28th. Now, our final card is a prototype Porobot. This Piltover and Zon card is a 2-mana 1-1 with Elusive, Attune, and Last Breath. Grant a 6-cost spell in hand. When I'm played, summon a prototype Porobot. This is overall an interesting card that predominantly goes into Jace-style control decks that want to be casting a lot of 6-cost spells. However, taking off turn 2, which is usually used to finish banking the necessary mana to cast a 6-drop spell on turn 3, is difficult, even if Tune means that you don't lose out on all the mana you'd normally bank. Overall, I just think that there's no real reason to run Proton in Poro King, since there aren't any big 6-mana spells in the region anymore. All the other regions usually run alongside the Poro King origin don't tend to play the 6-cost spells in that region would want to play. However, I do think this is a fantastic option in the Karma set Ionia Piltover and Zon control decks. The deck already tends to run plenty of 6-cost spells that Proton wants to see in hand. Having a repeatable source of chip damage or chump blocking is actually really desirable. Overall, I think that Proton has some interesting space for deck building, but we'll have to actually get our hands on him to be able to test out different options with him. Now, that's everything for the brand new cards that we'll be getting in 5.2. We'll make deck lists and discuss them further in 2 weeks when the patch is actually live and we've had an opportunity to play with the cards. Overall, this variety patch looks like it'll be a ton of fun, and I'm really excited to dive into PvP with the new cards. Next up, we've got this week's Hidden Spice. First up is Jinx Discard Aggro Vandal City flavor. With a representation of 130 games and a staggering 70% win rate, this deck is a classic aggro archetype that has always had solid performance, including in tournament lineups. So this is an excellent deck to pick up and put into work on for this weekend's final Open. Second is a Karma set Freljord version with a representation of 174 games and a win rate of 53%. A slight variation of the tournament staple, this is a slightly more beginner-friendly version of the list to pick up. Overall, a solid choice for picking up to grind out the ladder or to add to your open lineup for this weekend, and don't sleep on it. Third, we've got the Echo Jinx Shurima Predict Discard Aggro. This is the tried and true discard aggro deck. This list has a representation of 182 games and a win rate of 58%. Because you can only use a specific champion once in the lineup, I'd recommend going the Jinx Vandal City deck instead of the Echo Jinx, but if you're already experienced with the Echo version of the list, there's no real reason to swap the deck going into the Open this weekend. Fourth, we've got Janna Neela. This deck has representation of 190 games and a win rate of 51.6%. While the deck did get buffed, it's still not quite as strong as it used to be, but it is still a solid deck that many people will be comfortable with and playing in higher levels. This will be a strong deck to take to the final Open this weekend. Finally, we've got Ashe LeBlanc with a representation of 220 games and a win rate of 55%. This is another deck that's been around for a while, so should be another comfort pick. And while comfort picks don't necessarily mean that they're strong, they do show that if you're comfortable with a deck, you can do very well with it. Now, overall, all of this week's Hidden Spice are decks that have just been around for a while. While this is unfortunate, it's also not surprising, considering many of the top-level players have moved on to other games, and with so few people playing ranked nowadays, it is harder for sites to accumulate data to be able to make the lists of which decks are popular and what their win rates are. And so, overall, we do hope to see more people playing PvP with janky decks going forward, but it is unlikely, and it is possible that we'll have to discontinue this section if there's not enough data to pull these decks from. Next up, we'll cover a few Legend and Snooey decks to show that jank and deck brewing is still alive. First up, we've got Snooey with Rise Elder Dragon Backpack Combo. This standard legal variation on the infinite backpack printer deck that's been around in Eternal is an incredibly janky and spicy combo deck that utilizes a strange brew of standard legal cards to be able to generate the infinite combo. Overall, Snowy had a lot of fun with the deck, only about a 50% win rate. Next, another Snowy deck that was really spicy was Elder Dragon Tribal Ramp. This deck is focused on cheating out Elder Dragon and other big beefy dragons by using War Mother's Call. This deck is a blast to play, and Snowy also had about a 50% win rate with it. Moving on to the Legends of 27, we've got a Shurima Freljord deck that takes advantage of the Sun Disk change to be able to play Freljord for extra utility, especially by utilizing the Sigils of the Storm to ramp out the Clock Hand, which generates two of the fleeting spells in hand that accelerate or advance a landmark by 4. This means you get to ramp the Sun Disk out an extra 8 turns, making up for the fact that the Sun Disk won't start on the field. Overall, this deck only had about an 18% win rate, but had the potential to do better should the deck get a bit streamlined. I'm thinking that if you do pick up this deck, adding in a few of the thralls, the frozen thralls from Lysandra, could help add in some extra finishing potential to the deck by adding in just some extra overwhelm units that you can use in a pinch if you never find your Sun Disk. And then, since we came up with 10 potential decks for the upcoming variety patch, we won't be doing any final spice decks this week. We'll be back next week to cover some of the information from the final open for the year and planning for the patch on the 28th. We'll also see about doing some streams this week where we try to climb to Masters and use only janky decks while doing it. Thanks again for joining me this week, and I'll see you next week.